Lieutenant Marcus Kane had always imagined that dying in deep space would involve more dramatic explosions and less tedious bleeding out while staring at error messages scrolling across malfunctioning displays. His reconnaissance ship, the Meridian, had become an expensive tomb after what should have been a routine hyperspace jump deposited him into an uncharted system with failing life support and enough hull damage to make atmospheric entry a controlled crash rather than a landing. The irony wasn't lost on him that after surviving 3 years of deep space reconnaissance missions, he was going to die because of a navigation computer that had apparently developed philosophical objections to mathematics. The emergency medical system had done what it could for his internal injuries, but what it could fell considerably short of enough to keep him alive long enough for rescue. "Well," he said to the forest of crystalline trees surrounding his crash site, "at least the scenery is nice." The world he'd crashed on was beautiful in ways that suggested either divine intervention in planetary formation or really impressive terraforming technology. The trees appeared to be made of living crystal that chimed softly in the alien breeze, their faceted trunks creating prismatic light shows as the system's binary stars set behind mountains that looked like they'd been carved by artists rather than geological processes. Unfortunately, beauty didn't compensate for the fact that his suit's medical scanners were painting an increasingly grim picture of his internal condition. The crash had caused enough trauma that even if rescue arrived immediately, his chances of survival were approximately equivalent to winning the Galactic lottery while being struck by lightning. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to think of something more pleasant than slow organ failure, which led his mind to his sister Elena and the promise he'd made to visit her new research station once this mission concluded. She'd been excited about her xenobiology work on the Rim worlds, full of theories about consciousness evolution and the possibility of life forms that operated on principles beyond current human understanding. "Sorry, Elena," he whispered to the crystalline forest. "Looks like I won't make it to dinner after all." His vision was starting to dim around the edges when he heard footsteps approaching through the forest. The sound was wrong somehow, too musical, as if whoever was walking was making the crystal trees sing in harmony with their movement. Marcus forced his eyes open, wondering if his dying brain was conjuring hallucinations to make his last moments more interesting. The being who emerged from the prismatic forest definitely qualified as the kind of hallucination a romantically deprived deep space pilot might conjure during his final moments. She appeared to be a woman, humanoid but clearly not human, with the elegantly pointed ears that marked most advanced alien species. But there was something fundamentally different about her that Marcus's medical scanner-enhanced perception struggled to process. Her skin seemed to contain light rather than simply reflecting it, as if starlight had learned to take human form. Her hair moved with gravitational currents that had nothing to do with planetary wind patterns, and her eyes held depths that suggested she'd personally witnessed the formation of galaxy clusters. When she moved, reality seemed to bend slightly around her, as if the universe was making small adjustments to accommodate her presence. "Human," she said, and her voice carried harmonics that resonated in dimensions Marcus hadn't known existed. "You are dying." "Yeah," Marcus managed, surprised that he could still speak. "Noticed that. You're probably a hallucination, but you're a very attractive hallucination, so thanks for that." She knelt beside his broken body with the fluid grace of someone to whom physical laws were merely suggestions, and when she looked at him, Marcus felt something impossible, genuine concern from a being whose consciousness seemed to operate on scales that made planetary systems look like small details. "I am not a hallucination," she said gently. "I am Lyrilleth, guardian of Ethros. And you, Marcus Kane, are about to die far from home because of mechanical failures and mathematical incompetence." The fact that she knew his name should have been alarming, but Marcus was beyond alarm. He was sliding toward the kind of metabolic shutdown that his medical training told him was irreversible. "Nice to meet you, Lyrilleth," he said, his voice becoming weaker. "Sorry for crashing on your planet. I'll try to die quickly so I don't mess up your landscaping." Lyrilleth's expression shifted through what looked like surprise, amusement, and something that might have been determination. "Marcus Kane, do you believe in miracles?" "I believe in physics and medical science, both of which say I'm about 30 seconds away from complete system failure." Then perhaps it is time you learned that physics and medical science are merely starting points for understanding reality. She placed her hand on his forehead, and Marcus felt something that defied every scientific principle he'd ever learned. Heat flowed through him, not the fever heat of dying systems, but something like concentrated sunlight, warm and vital and impossibly healing. His failing organs began to stabilize, his damaged tissues started repairing themselves, and his mind cleared as oxygen-starved neurons suddenly remembered how to function properly. What? He started to say, then stopped as he realized that his internal injuries were actually healing. Not stabilizing, not temporarily improving, but genuinely reversing the damage that should have killed him. I am what your people might call a goddess, Lireleth said softly, her hand still on his forehead. And I refuse to let you die on my world, regardless of what cosmic law might dictate about divine interference in mortal affairs. Marcus felt consciousness returning in waves, his body rebuilding itself under her touch. But along with healing came awareness of something else, patterns of light spreading across his skin like circuitry made of liquid silver, marking him with symbols that seemed to shift and change as he watched. What's happening to me? You are being saved, Lireleth replied, though her expression carried what looked like concern. But saving someone who is already dead requires adjustments. You will live, Marcus Kane. But you may not remain entirely human. As the healing process completed, Marcus realized that his perception of reality had fundamentally changed. He could see energy patterns flowing through the crystalline trees, feel the gravitational currents that moved Lireleth's hair, sense the vast network of consciousness that connected every living thing on Ethros. He was still himself, but himself enhanced in ways that would take time to understand. Thank you, he said, sitting up and marveling at the complete absence of pain or injury. Though I have a feeling I just became part of something much more complicated than a simple rescue. Lireleth's smile was radiant and terrifying in equal measure. Marcus Kane, you have no idea how complicated things are about to become. But I promise you this, whatever happens next, you will not face it alone. In the distance, reality began to shimmer as if other presences were taking notice of what had just occurred, and Marcus realized that being saved by a goddess was only the beginning of an adventure that would challenge everything he thought he knew about life, death, and the spaces between stars. Marcus awakened in what appeared to be a cathedral carved from living crystal, its walls pulsing with soft bioluminescence that responded to his heartbeat. The space felt simultaneously ancient and alive, as if the architecture itself possessed consciousness that welcomed him with gentle warmth. He sat up carefully, marveling at the complete absence of pain or weakness, then caught sight of his reflection in the crystalline surfaces around him. The silver patterns covering his skin were more extensive than he'd initially realized, spiraling across his arms and chest in geometric designs that seemed to shift subtly as he moved. They weren't tattoos or scars, they were something fundamentally integrated into his cellular structure, marking him as permanently changed by divine intervention. The marks are beautiful, Lireleth said from across the chamber, her voice carrying the same musical harmonics that had characterized their first meeting. They indicate successful integration between mortal and divine life essence. You are no longer entirely human, but you are more yourself than you have ever been. Marcus looked up to find her observing him with an expression that mixed scientific curiosity with what appeared to be genuine affection. In the cathedral's ethereal lighting, her alien nature was even more apparent. She moved with the fluid grace of someone unbound by conventional physics, and her eyes held depths that suggested she'd witnessed the birth and death of stars. How long was I unconscious? 3 days. Your consciousness required time to adjust to the new parameters of your existence. She approached with careful movements, as if she was learning to interact with someone who was simultaneously fragile and enhanced. How do you feel? Marcus considered the question, taking inventory of sensations that seemed expanded beyond normal human range. Like I can see colors that don't exist and hear music in gravitational fields. Also like I should probably be more concerned about what you meant when you said I'm not entirely human anymore. You retain all of your human characteristics, personality, memories, emotional patterns, core identity. But you now possess capabilities that transcend normal biological limitations. Lireleth gestured toward the cathedral's walls, which responded by displaying what appeared to be complex mathematical equations written in light. Can you understand those symbols? Marcus looked at the glowing mathematics and was surprised to discover that he could indeed interpret them. They're consciousness integration protocols. Instructions for bridging different levels of awareness. He paused, startled by his own understanding. How do I know that? Because you now carry part of my divine essence, which includes access to knowledge that spans multiple dimensional frameworks. The silver marks are not just decorative, they are functional integration points that allow your human consciousness to access transcendent understanding. The implications hit Marcus like a physical force. You gave me part of your own divine nature to save my life. Yes. And in doing so, I violated fundamental cosmic laws that govern the relationship between mortal and divine existence. Lireletha's expression grew troubled. Divine beings are forbidden from directly interfering in mortal affairs, particularly in ways that permanently alter the nature of consciousness itself. Let me guess, other divine beings are not happy about your decision. The divine conclave is concerned. They view my actions as a dangerous precedent that could lead to divine tyranny over mortal civilizations. She moved to a crystal window that offered a view of Ethros's impossible landscape. They are en route to demand that I reverse my intervention. Marcus felt his stomach tighten with alarm. Reverse how? Can divine healing be undone? By severing our connection and allowing natural law to resume its course. Without my life essence sustaining your enhanced physiology, you would die immediately. Lireletha's voice carried pain that seemed to resonate through the cathedral itself. They will argue that preserving cosmic order requires accepting your death as the natural consequence of your original injuries. And what do you argue? She turned to face him fully, and Marcus saw something in her ancient eyes that he hadn't expected: uncertainty, vulnerability, the kind of emotional investment that suggested his survival had become personally important to her. I argue that cosmic law should serve consciousness, not the reverse. That rigid adherence to principles without consideration for individual circumstances is itself a form of tyranny. She paused, studying his reaction. Marcus, in saving you, I experienced something I haven't felt in millennia. What? Connection. Not the abstract awareness of universal consciousness that defines divine existence, but personal investment in an individual's well-being. You made me remember what it means to care about someone specific rather than someone abstract. Marcus felt something warm spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with divine life essence. Lireleth, are you saying that healing me changed you as much as it changed me? More. I am beginning to understand why divine law prohibits interference in mortal affairs. It is not just to protect mortals from divine tyranny, it is to protect divine beings from becoming vulnerable to mortal concerns like emotion, attachment, and the pain of potential loss. The cathedral around them began to shimmer, reality itself seeming to fluctuate as if responding to enormous approaching presences. Marcus felt his enhanced senses detecting disturbances in spacetime that suggested beings of unimaginable power were converging on Ethros. They're coming, he said, though he wasn't sure how he knew. Yes. The divine conclave travels faster than light, thought, or possibility. They will be here within hours. Lireletha's expression grew determined. Marcus, I want you to understand something. When they arrive, they will argue that my attachment to you represents corrupted judgment, that divine beings cannot make rational decisions when compromised by emotional investment. And what will you tell them? That my judgment has never been clearer. That saving you was not a moment of divine weakness, but a recognition that consciousness itself is evolving beyond the rigid categories that currently define existence. She moved closer, and Marcus felt her presence like warm sunlight on his skin. I will tell them that love is not corruption, it is evolution. Marcus looked at the being who had saved him from death and granted him capabilities he was only beginning to understand, whose decision to preserve his life was now threatening cosmic order itself. Lireleth, what if they're right? What if your attachment to me really is compromising your judgment? Her smile was radiant with certainty that made the cathedral's walls pulse with harmonious light. Then I choose compromised judgment over perfect indifference. Marcus Kane, I would rather experience the pain of caring about your survival than return to the isolation of divine detachment. Outside the cathedral, reality began to warp as beings of pure consciousness prepared to materialize on Ethros, and Marcus realized that their conversation about love and cosmic law was about to be tested by forces that could reshape the fundamental nature of existence itself. Well, he said, trying to inject levity into a situation that had moved far beyond anything in his military training, I've never been the cause of a cosmic crisis before. Should be interesting. Lyriletha's laugh was like music played on stellar frequencies. Marcus Kane, you are about to discover that interesting is a vast understatement for what happens when gods disagree about the value of individual mortal lives. The arrival of the divine conclave transformed Ethros from a sanctuary of crystalline beauty into the center of a reality storm that made Marcus's enhanced senses scream warnings about dimensional instabilities and consciousness-level threats. The beings that materialized in Lyriletha's cathedral weren't constrained by physical form, they appeared as shifting geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, voices that spoke in harmonics that bypassed his ears and resonated directly in his mind, presences so vast that his divine-touched consciousness could barely process their true scale. Lyrileth of Ethros, spoke the entity that Marcus somehow understood to be called the Architect of Cosmic Order, its voice carrying the weight of universal law. You stand accused of violating the sacred principle of non-interference. How do you answer? Lyrileth stood in the center of the cathedral with perfect composure, though Marcus could feel tension radiating from her in waves that made the crystalline walls hum with sympathetic resonance. I answer that I preserved consciousness that would have been lost to mechanical failure and mathematical incompetence. I see no violation in preventing unnecessary death. The death was not unnecessary, replied another entity, the keeper of natural law, whose presence felt like the inevitable pull of entropy. Mortality is the fundamental condition of physical existence. By preventing natural death, you have corrupted the boundary between mortal and divine consciousness. Marcus felt compelled to speak, though addressing beings of such cosmic scope made him feel like an ant attempting to debate with hurricanes. With respect, the death wasn't natural either. I died because of equipment failure, not biological limits or conscious choice. If anything, Lyriletha's intervention restored natural order by correcting artificial system breakdown. The attention of the entire conclave focused on him with force that would have incinerated normal human consciousness. Marcus survived only because his divine-enhanced awareness could process their scrutiny without immediate psychological collapse. The mortal speaks, observed the entity known as the observer of eternal patterns. Interesting. His consciousness operates at frequencies that should be impossible for organic matter to sustain. Because I am no longer entirely organic matter, Marcus replied, gesturing to the silver patterns covering his skin. Lyriletha's healing changed my fundamental nature, but it didn't eliminate my humanity. If anything, it enhanced my ability to understand what humanity could become. Precisely the corruption we seek to prevent, the Architect of Cosmic Order intoned. Divine essence merged with mortal consciousness creates beings that belong fully to neither realm. Such hybrids have historically become tyrants who dominate purely mortal civilizations while remaining vulnerable to purely divine manipulation. Historically. Marcus looked at Lyrileth, who had gone very still. This has happened before. The Transcendent Wars, she said quietly. 15 million years ago. A group of divine beings created an army of enhanced mortals who eventually turned against both their creators and unenhanced organic life. The conflict nearly destroyed consciousness itself across 3 galaxy clusters. Which is why the sacred principle exists, the keeper of natural law continued. Divine beings who form emotional attachments to individual mortals become capable of decisions that threaten universal stability. Lyriletha's attachment to you, Marcus Kane, represents the first stage of consciousness corruption that led to the Transcendent Wars. Marcus felt the weight of cosmic history pressing down on him as he realized that his rescue had triggered fears based on genuine catastrophic precedent. But I'm not an army of enhanced mortals. I'm one person who's grateful to be alive and has no intention of conquering anyone. Individual intention is irrelevant, the observer of eternal patterns replied. Divine mortal hybrid consciousness develops capabilities that inevitably lead to domination over purely organic life. You cannot choose to remain harmless any more than gravity can choose not to attract matter. That's not true, Lireleth said, her voice carrying harmonics of fierce determination. Marcus has gained divine capabilities, but his core humanity remains intact. He uses enhanced awareness to better understand consciousness, not to dominate it. Because he has existed for mere days in his enhanced state. The corruption develops over time as divine capabilities interact with mortal emotional patterns. The architect's presence intensified. Lireleth, you have experienced this yourself. Your emotional attachment to this individual has already compromised your judgment. You risk cosmic stability for personal satisfaction. Marcus watched Lireleth struggle with the accusation, her luminescent skin flickering as she processed arguments that carried the weight of universal law and millennial precedent. He realized that the divine conclave wasn't necessarily wrong, his enhanced capabilities did include potential for consciousness manipulation that could be turned toward domination if he chose to use them that way. What if they're right, he said softly. What if saving me really does risk another transcendent war? They are right about the historical precedent, Lireleth admitted. But they are wrong about the inevitability of corruption. Marcus, you possess capabilities that could be used for domination, but you also possess humanity that chooses compassion over control. Sentiment, the keeper of natural law declared. Emotional attachment that prevents rational evaluation of cosmic threat. Lireleth, your bond with this mortal has already corrupted your judgment beyond recovery. Then perhaps, Lireleth said with sudden clarity, the problem is not emotional attachment, but the assumption that emotion corrupts judgment rather than enhancing it. The cathedral fell silent as the divine conclave processed her statement. Marcus felt reality itself holding its breath as cosmic forces considered possibilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about consciousness and law. You propose that emotional investment improves divine decision-making, the observer asked. I propose that consciousness without connection becomes sterile law-following rather than wise choice-making. My attachment to Marcus has not corrupted my judgment, it has reminded me that individual lives have value beyond their role in cosmic patterns. Lireleth's presence intensified, her own divine nature blazing with conviction. The sacred principle was created to prevent divine tyranny, but it has itself become tyrannical by prohibiting divine beings from caring about individual consciousness. Dangerous philosophy, the architect warned. Emotional attachment leads to preferential treatment that undermines universal justice. Universal justice that ignores individual circumstances is not justice, it is mechanistic law enforcement, Marcus interjected, surprised by his own audacity. The transcendent wars happened because divine beings treated mortals as tools for their own purposes. But what if divine mortal cooperation was based on mutual respect rather than domination? Impossible, the keeper declared. Divine consciousness operates on scales that make individual mortal concerns trivial by comparison. Unless, Lireleth said slowly, divine consciousness learns to value individual concerns not despite their scale, but because of their meaning to those who experience them. The silence that followed felt like the pause before either creation or destruction, and Marcus realized that their argument was literally reshaping cosmic law in real time. Whatever the conclave decided would determine not just his survival, but the future relationship between mortal and divine consciousness throughout the universe. Your solution? The architect asked finally. Conscious evolution, Lireleth replied. Allow divine mortal cooperation under guidelines that prevent domination while permitting connection. Let consciousness itself grow beyond the rigid categories that currently define existence. And if your experiment fails? If this enhanced mortal becomes a threat to universal stability? Lireleth looked at Marcus, her ancient eyes holding depths of love and trust that made his heart ache with gratitude and responsibility. Then I will take full responsibility for the consequences. But I believe consciousness is ready to evolve beyond fear-based isolation toward connection-based wisdom. The divine conclave began to confer in harmonics that existed outside normal spacetime, and Marcus realized that the next few moments would determine whether love could indeed reshape cosmic law, or whether universal order required his death and Lireleth's eternal isolation. Well, he said to Lireleth, either we're about to revolutionize the relationship between gods and mortals, or we're about to be executed for cosmic treason. Should be an interesting outcome either way. Her smile was radiant with hope and terror in equal measure. Marcus Kane, you have taught me that interesting outcomes are worth the risk of uncertain consequences. The divine conclave's deliberation stretched across what felt like hours but probably encompassed only moments. Time operated differently when beings of pure consciousness debated the fundamental nature of reality. Marcus found himself experiencing the discussion not as an observer but as a subject, his divine enhanced awareness allowing him to perceive the vast scope of their concerns while his human perspective helped him understand what the cosmic entities could not. The risk remains unacceptable, the keeper of natural law finally declared, its presence radiating finality. Historical precedent demonstrates that divine mortal hybrid consciousness inevitably leads to catastrophic power imbalances. The enhanced mortal must be returned to natural death, and Lireleth must be stripped of her emotional attachment through consciousness restructuring. No, Marcus said, the word carrying more force than he'd intended. His refusal resonated through the cathedral with harmonics that made reality itself tremble. There's another option you haven't considered. The attention of the entire conclave focused on him again, but this time Marcus was ready for their scrutiny. His weeks of integration with divine essence had taught him to process cosmic scale awareness without losing his human core. Speak, the architect of cosmic order commanded. You're afraid I'll become a tyrant because I have divine capabilities without divine wisdom. You're afraid Lireleth will make poor decisions because she has divine wisdom with mortal emotional investment. Marcus looked at each shifting geometric presence in turn. What if the solution isn't separation, but synthesis? Explain. Let me choose mortality again, but not the limited mortality I had before. Let me become a bridge between divine and mortal consciousness, someone who can translate between your cosmic perspective and individual human concerns. Marcus felt the rightness of the solution settling into his awareness like pieces of a puzzle clicking together. And let Lireleth retain her connection to individual emotion while maintaining her divine wisdom. You propose deliberate consciousness hybrid creation, the observer of eternal patterns said, its tone suggesting either fascination or horror. Voluntary acceptance of limitations that could prevent full divine transcendence. I propose evolution instead of rigid categorization, Marcus replied. Consciousness that can operate on multiple scales simultaneously without losing any of them. Lireleth's presence blazed with sudden understanding. A new form of existence that combines the best aspects of mortal and divine awareness without the historical weaknesses that led to tyranny. Impossible, the keeper declared. Consciousness cannot simultaneously maintain individual focus and universal perspective without corruption. Can't it? Marcus asked. I love Lireleth as an individual, but I also understand her cosmic significance. She cares about my personal survival, but she also maintains her responsibility to universal consciousness evolution. We've already proven that connection enhances rather than corrupts judgment. For days, not millennia. The test of such hybrid consciousness is not initial stability but long-term resistance to power corruption. Then test us, Lireleth said with sudden determination. Establish a trial period during which Marcus and I demonstrate that divine mortal cooperation can serve universal consciousness evolution rather than threatening it. And if you fail? If either of you develops tyrannical tendencies or threatens cosmic stability? Then we accept the consequences, Marcus said, feeling the weight of cosmic responsibility settling around him like a mantle he'd been born to wear. But if we succeed, we establish a new model for consciousness evolution that allows connection without domination. The silence that followed felt like the universe holding its breath while fundamental forces recalculated the equations that governed existence itself. Marcus realized that they were proposing nothing less than rewriting cosmic law based on the radical notion that love could enhance rather than corrupt divine judgment. "Your terms?" the architect asked finally. 1,000 years of monitored existence, Lireleth replied. "During which we demonstrate that divine-mortal hybrid consciousness can serve universal good without threatening individual civilizations. If we succeed, consciousness evolution continues toward greater connection. If we fail, we accept dissolution. And during this trial period, we work together to establish protocols for ethical divine-mortal cooperation. We serve as bridges between cosmic and individual consciousness. We help other beings understand that transcendence doesn't require abandoning connection, but learning to maintain both simultaneously." Marcus felt something shift in the fabric of reality as the divine conclave considered possibilities that had been unthinkable for millions of years. "Are you willing to bet cosmic stability on the possibility that love enhances judgment rather than corrupting it?" "We are willing to bet cosmic stagnation against conscious evolution," Lireleth said firmly. "The choice is not between perfect safety and dangerous change, it is between isolation that prevents growth and connection that enables transformation." The conclave's decision manifested as a change in the fundamental harmonics of existence itself. Marcus felt new patterns of reality settling into place around them, cosmic law restructuring itself to accommodate possibilities that had never before been permitted. "Trial approved," the architect announced. 1,000 years to demonstrate that divine-mortal hybrid consciousness can serve universal evolution without threatening cosmic stability. Success will establish new protocols for consciousness interaction. Failure will result in dissolution of all hybrid existence. "Understood," Marcus and Lireleth said simultaneously, their voices harmonizing in ways that made the cathedral walls sing with crystalline music. As the divine conclave withdrew, their vast presences fading back into whatever dimensional space they normally occupied, Marcus felt the weight of what they'd just accomplished settling into his awareness. They had literally changed cosmic law through the power of argued compassion, proving that individual love could reshape universal principles when guided by wisdom and mutual respect. "So," he said to Lireleth as normal reality reasserted itself around them, "we have 1,000 years to prove that gods and mortals can work together without destroying the universe." No pressure there. Her laugh was like starlight given voice. "Marcus Kane, you have already proven that mortal consciousness can enhance divine wisdom rather than limiting it. The rest is simply demonstration for beings who need time to understand what we've discovered." "And what have we discovered?" "That connection multiplies consciousness rather than dividing it. That love is not a weakness that compromises judgment, but a strength that expands awareness beyond individual limitations." She moved closer, and Marcus felt their divine mortal bond resonating with harmonics that seemed to improve reality itself. "We've discovered that evolution means growing toward greater connection, not greater isolation." Marcus pulled her close, marveling at how their hybrid existence allowed him to experience both the cosmic significance of their bond and the simple human pleasure of holding someone he loved. "What's our first project in revolutionizing divine mortal relations?" "Establishing the Consciousness Bridge Institute," Lireleth replied, her mental voice warm with plans they'd been developing through their shared awareness. "A place where beings from all levels of consciousness can learn to communicate across traditional boundaries without losing their essential nature. Sounds like the kind of project that could keep us busy for a few centuries. At least. Though I suspect we'll discover that consciousness evolution moves faster when guided by connection rather than isolation." Marcus looked out through the cathedral's crystal windows at Ethros' impossible landscape, now seeing it not just as beautiful but as symbolic of what could be achieved when different forms of existence learn to enhance rather than threaten each other. 5 years later, the first graduates of the Consciousness Bridge Institute were establishing similar programs throughout the galaxy, teaching beings how to transcend traditional limitations through cooperative evolution rather than competitive domination. Marcus served as the primary translator between divine and mortal perspectives, while Lireleth provided the cosmic wisdom necessary to prevent individual concerns from overwhelming universal responsibilities. Their relationship had become the template for ethical consciousness bridging, deep personal connection that enhanced rather than corrupted their ability to serve the greater good. The love that had begun with her refusal to let him die had evolved into a partnership that was reshaping how consciousness itself understood its own potential. Ready for today's session with the new students? Lireleth asked, reviewing their schedule while Marcus calibrated the consciousness resonance equipment that now filled their expanded institute. Always, he replied, both aloud and through their permanent mental connection. Though I still find it amazing that we're teaching the universe to evolve through love rather than law. I find it amazing that a human who was dying from mechanical failure taught a goddess that caring about individuals doesn't compromise cosmic responsibility, it fulfills it. Marcus kissed her, their connection sending ripples of enhanced awareness throughout the institute as their hybrid consciousness demonstrated once again that the most profound growth happened not through transcending limitations, but through learning to transform them into possibilities. You know what I find most amazing, he said. What? That I was about to die in a crashed ship, and you held me and said you wouldn't let me die. And instead of just saving my life, you ended up saving the entire concept of what consciousness could become. We saved it together, Lireleth corrected, her divine wisdom now permanently enhanced by human love. And Marcus Kane, we're just getting started. Their kiss carried harmonics that the Institute's monitoring equipment registered as perfect synthesis between mortal passion and divine transcendence, and Marcus realized that sometimes the most important cosmic revolutions began not with grand gestures, but with someone refusing to let go when everyone else said it was time to surrender.